My name is Ian Hamm, and I'm standing on the land of my ancestors, Yorta country, next to Dungala, or as you might call it, the mighty Murray River. My relationship with country is embodied in my physical being. The water that flows through the landscape is the blood in my veins. The trees, their trunks, are the bones of my body. The earth is the muscle and fibre of my very being. I acknowledge the elders of my people, those who came before me, those who've carried our traditions, those who are Yorta now and the Yorta in the generations to come. Being welcome to country is an invitation for everybody on our country to, while they're here, feel like they belong. While you're here today, you have a place on Yorta country.
Ian Hamm, welcome to 1+1.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you live in Melbourne, but we're here at Yarrawonga today because this is where it all began for you. This is where you grew up.
Yes, it is. I grew up right here on the shores of Lake Mulwala, or rather a bit away from the lake. We were at the other end of town. But yes, this is where I'm from.
You were one of 3 Aboriginal people in Yarrawonga at the time, and you were all living in the same house.
Yes. So I was an adopted child, as were my 2 adopted sisters who were also Aboriginal. We were stolen children, part of the stolen generations, and this is the 1960s when we were adopted. We were adopted by the people I call Mum and Dad, 2 non-Aboriginal people who decided when they couldn't have any more children. I've got an older brother who's their birth son, but he's 10 years older than me, and when they couldn't have any more children, they decided they wanted to adopt, but they were very clear they wanted to adopt Aboriginal children because they'd been involved with and knew Aboriginal people from when they were children themselves in the 1920s and 1930s.
I can imagine that you spent so much time having a great time out here.
Oh yeah, whether it's on the water or by the banks of the water, on down the river or here on the lake, it was just really good fun growing up here.
What did family look like and mean to you with your sisters?
I guess family for us was a place of, we felt like we were secure, but always having that thing in our minds of where were we from? What did adoption mean? I remember thinking that it was common practice if your family was expanding. I thought everyone did this. You get in a car, you drive somewhere, you pick up a baby and you come home. Because I remember going as a family, going to Mildura to pick up a baby who was my youngest sister. And I still remember the shock I got when a mate of mine, Sparrow Harris, gave me the real news on how babies happen. I was 8 years old and his mother was expecting and he gave me the real news, and that was kind of a bit of a shock to me. To find out that we were the exception rather than the rule opened that question of, so where am I from? And finding the story from Mum and Dad, where did I come from?
So your name is Ian Hamm, but you were, on your birth certificate, it was Andrew James. Tell me about how that came to be.
Well, I'd always known that my name used to be Andrew James, because I can't remember being told I was adopted. I just always knew that. Mum and Dad had never, well, if you'd seen my mum and dad, short, white, round, me not. When Mum and Dad were picking me up, they didn't expect to be told my surname because you weren't supposed to tell anybody anything about adoptees in those days. But when the woman who literally handed me over told Mum and Dad his name is Andrew James and he's got some Indian in him, I always had in my mind, well, what does that mean? We all thought Andrew James were like 2 Christians' names. I only found out later when I started to find out who I was and where I was from, what that actually meant. And when I found out that the name James wasn't a second Christian name, it was in fact a surname. Yeah. For the person I told that to, he just put 2 and 2 together in about 5 seconds.
What was going on there? How did that all come about?
Okay, so I finished high school in Yarrawonga. I did finish year 12, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I, in fact, tried for 2 apprenticeships around Yarrawonga, one at a tractor mechanics and one over at the explosives factory here, and I missed out on both of them. At the time, I was kind of a bit devastated, but also thinking, well, what am I going to do now, you know? Because I failed year 12, and I'll be honest about it, twice.
Failed twice?
Failed twice. I say I did it the second time because I liked it so much the first time, I thought I'd do it again. I think we all know that's not the real reason. But it was kind of like, well, what do I do, you know? Because I love learning and I love politics and economics and all of that stuff. What am I going to do around here? I tried for 2 apprenticeships, missed out on them. And then Mum and Dad got contacted by the Aboriginal education people. Who used to come up once a year and visit me and Trina and Joan here in Yarra. Next thing I know, I'm off to Bendigo to do teaching. It's kind of like a drive-by drop-off by Mum and Dad. It's kind of like, slow down the car, open the door, push me out. See you in 3 years, son. It's kind of that, you know, which was a good thing. So I go to Bendigo and it was an Aboriginal teacher education program. And this is the first time I've mixed with other Aboriginal people, other blackfellas, en masse. And the third day it was like really hot and a few of us said, oh, let's go to the pool. So we go to the Bendigo swimming pool and a man named Gary, who was up from Melbourne, he was with Aboriginal education at that stage. And I'll never forget it. We were both sitting on the side of the pool and he said to me, so you're from Yarrawonga? And I said, yeah. He said, oh. So he said, do you know anything about yourself? Because I've not heard of the name Hamm. I said, oh, no, I'm adopted, you know. He said, oh, yeah. So do you know anything? I said, oh, all I know is, I said, probably me, think that my name was Andrew James and I've got, you know, I'm Aboriginal, but I've got some Indian blood. He looks at me and goes, oh, right, I think I know who you are. I'll get back to you. And then just dives in the pool. And I'll go, hello, what? And so, yeah, obviously later we started talking. He said, you know, look, I'll put out some feelers, have a chat, get back to you and stuff. And so 6 months later, I get a call from Elaine from the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency, BACA. She said, I've got some information about who you are and where you're from.
How'd that feel?
Imagine yourself in a universe that's pitch black, and as the story rolls out, different stars or different things start to light up. That's what that felt like. That was where she told me I was from Shepparton. That was difficult to make a lot of sense of because, you know, growing up, we used to go to Shep, go shopping in the big town, as they say. And I kept thinking, have I seen people in my family before? Have I seen my brothers and sisters? Did I pass them in the street and not know? We were Yorta. And what does that mean? Oh, well, Yarrawonga's in Yorta country. At that stage, country, I wasn't sure what that meant. But then I started to kind of learn about it and from other Aboriginal people, and I suddenly realised I grew up on the lands of my ancestors. My feet were on the same dirt and sand and water of the Murray River that theirs were, for not just 1 or 2 generations, but for thousands. It's funny, even now, people say, where are you from? And I say, I'm from Yarrawonga, on the border. Oh, but I live in Melbourne. Oh, how long you been there? 40 years, you know? And I think that partly is explained by me growing up on my own country, even if I didn't know it was my country. Finding out later explains so much about me and why I still reference I'm from Yarrawonga, you know.
It must have been bittersweet knowing how so close yet so far. And I wonder if at that time you were thinking about that point, about the very soil you were on, about why it had felt so much like home and having that place, but not understanding the why.
Well, that's the really interesting thing, Dan, because it's funny, growing up in a place like Yarrawonga, which is my home, but I'm not sure I ever felt a part of it. But the place where Yarrawonga is, I absolutely felt connected to everything around it. The water, the trees, particularly the trees for some reason, The soil, particularly down the river bends. We used to go down there every weekend. I loved it as a kid, just mucking around all day when we were little and feeling a direct association with that when I was a kid, but I didn't know why. To find out why after I left kind of explained for me a few things, but also made me enormously a cross between sad and resentful. Sad because I wish I'd known. Resentful because how much more could that have meant to me and helped shape me if I'd have known all this, you know? Yeah. When I grew up, there used to be a huge forest of dead trees through there, and in the right light, it'd turn almost a red would reflect off it, but the trees would turn a bright silvery colour, and it was like they came to life. They were still speaking, still telling the story of the thousands of generations that had been here and the hundreds of years that a lot of these trees had lived before they drowned. And I always felt great comfort from the trees, and I didn't know why, but I found out later why, because this is Yorta country and this is my country.
As you were finding out, Ian, about your family's history and the contemporary story of your family, I understand that you discovered you were one of 5. Were all of your siblings taken like you were?
No, I was the only one. I was the only one.
Why?
I was the youngest. I was born in Melbourne and the others were born in Shepparton. Look, nobody really knows why. There's only one person who could answer that, is my mother. When Elaine came and spoke to me, she said to me, your mother died in 1966 and she never told anybody who your father was. And so that whole universe thing still has a black hole at the middle of it for me. And I remember one of my aunties who has since passed away, Auntie Claire, she said to me, you're so like your mother. And I said, what do you mean? Do I look like her? And she said, yeah, you look a bit like her, but your character, you're a lot like your mother.
Yeah, for your auntie to be having said that, it must, well, it sounds like it's something that you still grapple with now about who was mum.
Exactly, it is. I count myself as lucky and I had a mum and dad, an adopted mum and dad.
Yeah.
A lot of kids, when they were adopted, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, were told, don't go and find your adopted background, that's all bad, leave it behind. But my parents were not like that. They knew the day would come where we'd want to. And so while I won't say they overtly encouraged us, they didn't do anything to discourage us.
I wonder if you had a sense of what it felt like to be Aboriginal and that disconnect or that tension of not knowing where your place is and where you fit in.
Until you find where you're from, you've just got this thing, I just popped out of nowhere. There's no backstory, there's no journey to how you got here. There's no inherited anything. You're just there. And so to find where you're from and where you're connected, particularly when you're Aboriginal, that redefines actually who you are. You go from being almost just floating to suddenly to being anchored. And from that anchoring gives you very, very solid confidence about who you are, where previously you didn't have one.
And I wonder if there's a synergy there between what we hear discussed a lot about intergenerational trauma, the way that pain can be carried on, with where that intersects with the disconnection and the not having that anchoring or the grounding that you were just talking about.
Oh, that intergenerational trauma, that's real, that's actual. Nobody intentionally passes it on, but it happens. There's been work done that says it ripples through for 7 generations. I don't think people appreciate that. That's 140 years that the removal or the complete dislocation of people through the stealing of children, the taking of children, has a 140-year impact. That's into the 22nd century from where we are today, you know? It's indescribable for people to get their head around. For myself, I've always consciously worked every day to not pass on the bad things of me onto my children, Jasper and Isabel, because if I never do anything else in my life worthwhile, the one thing I will not do is pass on the bad things of me onto my children.
So what is right and what is wrong? To the stolen generations, I say the following.
When the apology to the stolen generations was being made, one of the counter conversations was, why should anyone apologise for things that have happened in the past, which of course ignored the fact that it was still happening, and if you consider out-of-home care, it's still happening. So there's a whole range of areas to unpack there. But what do you say to people when they say, actually, you know, it's not about, or that you shouldn't be apologising or making reparations for the past?
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of national maturity that we need to get our heads around, because there's lots of things in Australia's past that we don't like to talk about, but there's lots of things in Australia's past that we do like to talk about that none of us were alive to see. The obvious one is Anzac Day. Every Anzac Day, people come together to commemorate and acknowledge particularly the World War I veterans, the landing of Gallipoli, but veterans afterwards. But last time I checked, nobody in Australia was on the beaches of Gallipoli in 1915. Yet we all claim that. Yet we all feel we have a part of it. It's part of who makes us who we are as Australians. Equally, the taking of children was something in our national narrative that collectively has made who we are as a people, who we are as a nation. If you're a mature nation, if you're coming to grips with your history and working out where you're going, you don't get to pick and choose the bits you like. That's what toddlers do. So those who say, why should we apologise? It's not you individually apologising. It's a country saying, we did this to our own people.
What did the apology mean to you?
It meant two things, the same thing, but in two different applications. One, it meant that my country acknowledged my own existence, my existence. I didn't have to explain myself to everyone. I didn't have to justify to people who I was, what it meant to be stolen, how all this, you know, the whole thing. Because the Prime Minister said sorry. On behalf of the country. It was just this enormous relief was probably the biggest sense. I remember I cried when he said to the mothers, the fathers, the brothers and the sisters, we say sorry.
We offer this apology to the mothers, the fathers, the brothers, the sisters, the families and the communities.
And the bit when he said, and this is the bit of me that's, you know, always thought the institutions can do a lot of good, when he said, Mr. Speaker, I commend the motion to the House. I just cried. I cry now. When Kevin Rudd said that. It's one of those things that was a watershed for me outwardly, but me inwardly as well.
Let's grasp this opportunity to craft a new future for this great land, Australia. Mr. Speaker, I commend the motion to the House.
And it meant I no longer had to, we no longer as stolen children, had to argue that our existence was real. The Prime Minister had said it on behalf of the country in the Parliament on the first day of a new Parliament. We're done with that. We can move on to dealing with the issues of the stolen children, not argue whether they exist or not.
And I understand that you were eligible for reparations, but you chose not to take them.
I have chosen not to do that. I chaired the committee that developed the Victorian reparations package. In developing the package, I had a fairly hands-on approach as the chair. I made the decision that I would not be applying for it because I didn't want anybody being able to call the whole scheme into disrepute, saying that Ian Hamm chaired this and he had a heavy influence over design so he could benefit from it personally. Absolutely not. I would not do that because in my mind this is about everybody else, it's not about me.
That work has clearly underpinned your career, going from teachers' college to working in public policy on a number of landmark areas, including Traditional Settlement Act around native title in Victoria that led to different frameworks. And you've got this long, long list of incredible work you've done. Is there a single thing that has underpinned that for you?
The single thing that has run as a thread all through that was that, and it built up over time, but it was that thing of as I've worked out more who I was personally, was finding out who my people are and just refusing to accept, why are my people at the bottom of everything? Why do people talk to us and about us so badly? If my life is to have any meaning to it, it's to do what I can do to ensure my people are better placed in the world when I leave it than when I came into it. I did a bad thing for a public servant. Public servants are supposed to implement the policies of the government of the day. Well, what if they don't have any? Or what if they have is garbage or not very good? I don't say garbage. They're not very well thought through. They're short term and they focus on single things, which in effect means you're going nowhere. If we keep doing what we've been doing, we won't change anything. I've got a better idea. And in my journey of the public service, I like to think I contributed to the reshaping of how government conceives the Aboriginal community and conceives its role with the Aboriginal community, and help contribute to how we as the Aboriginal community conceive ourselves.
Ian, what drives you now?
I suppose now what drives me is still that same thing. What can I do to make a contribution to a better society? I'd done some work with the Victorian Equal Opportunity Commission in the early 90s around the AFL, and race issues emerged there, such as Michael Long, Nicky Winmark, Chris Lewis. So in 1999, the Western Region Football League, it was the Footscray District League in those days, asked me to come along and be racial vilification officer. And I did that for a year. And as a result of that, some of the clubs asked me if I'd stand for the board, and the then president said that would be good, be on the board, so on and so forth. And I ended up president of the league in 2002. But it did open my mind to a different position, which was, hang on, I'm Aboriginal and I'm not playing football because, suffice to say, I was never in danger of being recruited by any of the AFL clubs to run on up and down the MCG.
That wasn't a risk for you?
That was never a risk, you know. That was never going to happen. But my involvement in football was in the administrative side, and I'm president of one of the biggest leagues in Melbourne, one of the big 5 leagues in Melbourne. I think I'm the only Aboriginal person who's ever been in charge of a major sporting institution in this country. As far as I know, I'm the only one that there's been, and that was in the early 2000s. We still focus on blackfellas playing games, not running them. That is enormously frustrating. So now I focus on Aboriginal people being involved in things beyond just Aboriginal affairs. Why aren't we engaged in the discussions around the Australian economy, bringing our Aboriginal values and the things we hold to our heart to the discussion of the economy, or to Australia's political engagements, or to other things that are happening about the whole nation? Our viewpoint is not just about us. It's a contribution we can make to, quite frankly, a better Australia. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what I look to do at the moment.
Ian, where do you sit on The Voice?
I'm very much in favour of The Voice. The Voice is an opportunity for the opinions, views, the aspirations, the hopes of ordinary Aboriginal people to get a look in. to add to the sum total of what's already brought to the discussion about who we are as a people, what our relationship with government and government's relationship with us are, and in a broader context, the relationship with the broader Australia as well, non-Aboriginal Australia. I'm very much in favour of it, and I recognise it as just another step along the way. The real question is, and I'll do this in 1967 speak, just so everyone gets it and we're clear on it, should the Aborigines be able to speak? Should we allow the Aborigines to be able to talk about things that are about them? Or do we maintain the silence of the blacks? That's the real questions that every Australian has to ask themselves, and it's a yes or no answer. We come up here once a year around Christmas, and one thing I really like to do is go for a swim. And it feels like it just washes the whole year's cares away from me. The river just goes through my entire body, not around it, but through it, and just takes everything with it and takes it away.
Ian, what does the term elder mean to you?
I think what that means to me is somebody who, over the course of their life, have made a significant contribution to the community in which they live. That their life has been driven by things beyond themselves.
Ian, there's another part of being an elder, and that's that it's not often self-identified. It's something that is earned or bestowed by the community. So I wonder how you feel when people call you an elder.
There's a couple of mixed emotions about it. One of them, really, people think I'm that old. There is that. But to be honest, Dan, I think I'm not sure how to handle it. Going back to my very early days, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I fit in and what I meant to be. This is the insecurities of childhood coming into, you know, my later adulthood still, is that, am I a real Aboriginal person? Do I fit into this community? So when people call me Uncle Ian or an elder or stuff, that's the first things that come to my mind. Am I really that? Am I, you know, that uncertainty is still there. When you get told as a child, particularly when you're Aboriginal, by people who are unkind, to say to you, nobody wanted you when you were a baby because you're black. You're lucky Charlie and Mary wanted you because nobody else did. That never leaves you. It stays with you for the rest of your life. So when people give me the time of day, that's enormously important to me.
That's heartbreaking to hear that long-lasting impact of those cruel words. It strikes me that so much of your life has been about finding that sense of belonging and understanding connection and place. Do you feel a sense of peace now? And I wonder if you feel like we can ever truly heal from life's those difficult traumas.
I think those difficult traumas that happen throughout your life, you don't ever heal from them or get over them, but they add to the sum total of who you are and keep you going and help you find your place in the world, which is why I went into government and worked in the public service, because I thought I could stand on the outside and yell at government, or I can be in it and take it where I think it needs to go, which is what I did. Healing for me is not about me, it's about what I'm doing for everybody else, and we're doing treaty, and we're doing a Stolen Generations reparations package, and we're opening doors for Aboriginal people beyond the narrow confines of where people think, isn't that all that Aboriginal people do? That's how I've managed to deal with the peaks, but particularly the troughs.
Ian Hamm, it's been an absolute pleasure to have a yarn with you. Thanks for joining me on 1+1.
Thanks for having me, Dan.